Lawgical, the UAE's first and still only regular legal podcast. My name is Tim Elliott. As always, I'm at the Dubai-based legal firm HPL Yamalova and Plethka. We're in Jumeirah Lakes Towers here in Dubai, and I'm with Ludmila Yamalova, the managing partner. Nice to see you again.
Good to be here with you, Tim.
Ludmila, we are recording on June the 1st, 2023. June the 1st, 2023 heralds a new era. Corporate tax has been officially, I was going to say launched. It's not quite the right word. It's introduced today. And this is kind of day one, I suppose, of people trying to understand what the tax means, the threshold, the rate, and I guess also how to register. And those are the things I wanted to talk to you about today. Just briefly, really. It's incumbent on lots of different people, and we'll talk about who it is, to register for corporate tax from today's date, isn't it? Let's run through registration.
Yes. Well, first of all, what we're talking about is what is otherwise known as the UAE Corporate Tax Law. Kind of a scary phrase, especially for all of those who've lived and worked and run businesses in the UAE for however many years. Until recently, the word tax was kind of a non-existent in our vocabulary, apart from the VAT, which is the value-added tax, which was introduced in 2018, but that was enough of a shocker back then, but we've kind of sort of absorbed it and accepted it as just moving along with the times. But since it was not a direct, the VAT is not a direct tax, it didn't really kind of affect us so much personally, at least for many. Now it's something different. This is now UAE corporate tax law. So that now this particular tax does affect particular businesses and people or natural persons directly. So this is a direct tax versus the indirect tax, which is the VAT, and there's this kind of menacing concept, word, phrase, was introduced by virtue of the UAE Federal Decree Law number 47 of 2022 on the taxation of corporations and businesses. So that's kind of the name of the law. And the law was introduced in 2022, but as you rightfully said, it will start applying the application or who it's going to start applying to with kicking after or in 2023. And in particular, it will start applying for any businesses as of June 1st, 2023, which is right now, for any businesses whose fiscal year or financial year starts in June. So, so for all those businesses for whom fiscal year starts in June, then as of today, they will now, technically speaking, be subject to this UAE corporate tax law, at least, and we kind of go through what that means. But it's for now, it's more procedurally rather than substantively the definition of being subject to it. But yeah, if you're a business and your fiscal year is of June every year, so then today is the day when you're supposed to, where you are now officially subject to the UAE corporate tax, and also as part of that, you need to register with the UAE, to the relevant authorities and government. Now, for all those businesses for whom fiscal year starts on the calendar year, i.e. January 1st, this obligation, or they will become subject to this law as of January 2024. Right. So today is not the D-Day for all the businesses in the UAE. It's really only for those whose fiscal year starts as of June. For all the other businesses, including, for example, our business, we operate in the calendar year, so we'll become subject to this law as of January 2024.
You can register now, is the point. The platform, it's Emara Tax, is that right? Is open.
Correct. Yeah. In fact, maybe it's not so much the obligation yet, but the ability to register became available as May 15th of just this year. Yeah. And the registration is done through what's called the Emara Tax Platform, which is launched by the UAE Federal Tax Authority and or the FTA. But at present, at least as of May, and as of for now, right today as well, it's only open. The registration that is open for private companies or public joint stock companies. It is not yet available for free zones. So any businesses that are based in free zones, they cannot yet register. But it will certainly, the ability for those businesses, for free zones to be registered, will become available later in the year. So this is another kind of topic maybe for another day, but this does exactly mean what I just said, which is free zone companies or free zone businesses, even though they're based in free zones, they are still subject to this law to an extent, and they still have to register with the authorities, with the FTA, through this Emirate tax platform, even if they're free zones. So similarly, the registration for other categories of taxable persons, such as natural persons who are conducting business or business activity, will also be open later. So for example, if you're a freelancer, you also ultimately will have to register and you will be subject to this law, and you will have to, as part of being subject to the law, you'll have to register. You may not have to pay tax, so we'll come back to it, but you are subject to the law because you are in business, even if you're just a freelancer, and you will have to register. But right now, the D-Day of June 1st, which is today, does not quite apply to, let's say, you as a natural person, because the system is not open, or the free zone companies. Like our firm is based in the free zone, so we also cannot register yet. But it's a rolling system. The services are being kind of bolstered and refined as we go through the process. So right now it's open to once again the private companies and public joint stock companies. But as time goes on, more and more businesses will be able to register. And just a little bit about this platform, the Emirate tax platform. It's it's a government platform, so it's just not to be misunderstood. It's not some sort of a private service. It is a government platform, and it integrates entities such as the UAE Central Bank, the UAE Pass, which we've talked about before, and we know, and we have a special podcast episode on just the UAE Pass and why it's important. And voila, this is another example of why the UAE Pass is important. Yep. So you register, and this is integrate this your ability to integrate and register for this Emirate tax platform is linked with your UAE Pass and the UAE Central Bank, and to basically other government services. At least we haven't really used it ourselves yet because it's not available to us, but at least according to the representations of the various government authorities, the whole Emirate Tech platform is meant to be kind of intuitive and easy to use, and with various self-help options, and will even be available on mobile soon, and all obviously with the objective of providing you no excuse not to register. So it's going to be very easy to register and very easy to receive answers, so that you have zero excuse to claim that I didn't understand, I couldn't register. So that's the registration. So it is now open for many businesses, and certainly all those businesses whose fiscal year starts as of June 1st are already subject to this corporate tax. Okay,
let's talk about the tax rate and the thresholds. 9% is the headline figure, isn't it?
Yes. So 9% for those of us who didn't even have tax in our vocabulary is a lot. But for all those other businesses,
the T word, Ludmila.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I don't want to say it out loud too much. But for those, for many other businesses and for many other individuals who are doing businesses as natural persons, for example, 9% for them is still not very much if you compare it to other countries. And then that's the other side of the argument is you've compared to, for example, certain European countries, Nordic countries, where tax rate can go up to 50-60%, and 9% is fairly moderate. But yes, the tax rate is 9%, and it applies not to all businesses. So not all businesses have to pay. It only applies to any sort of income for all those businesses whose income is more than 375,000 dirhams, or which is about $100,000 per year.
Yeah.
And it applies to what's called taxable persons, and they could be legal or natural. In other words, they could either be a company with a license, or it could be a natural person. Just for example, you, Tim, Elliot, operating on your own, but you're wheeling and dealing, doing businesses without any kind of license necessarily, but you're sort of doing business. That's an example of a natural person. As long as you're doing business, you're also subject to it, even though you don't have a legal entity sort of to on the basis of which you're operating and wheeling and dealing. Okay. But as long as, so it doesn't apply to all of your income. It's only income that you make over the threshold. So in other words, over 375,000 dirhams. So let's say if you're making 250,000 dirhams a year or 300,000 dirhams, you don't need to pay any tax. So the 9%, so it's 0%. So your income is subject to 0%.
Yeah.
So 9% only applies to those who make over 375,000, one, and two, it only applies on the margin, on anything above 375,000. So, for example, if you are making 375,000, you're still at zero. But if you're making 300 and or 400,000, so you have to pay 9% on the margin, on the difference between 400,000 and 375,000. So you're only paying 9% on the 25,000 dirhams. Yep. So that's an important caveat, that it's not all of your income that is covered. It's only just basically the margin. That's one. And two is that it's called an income tax, not a revenue tax, which is important. So, for example, and this is obviously a lot more substantive topic, and we can dedicate subsequent podcasts to these various sort of subtopics of this very large and complex and nuanced area of law, which is very new to all of us. But in general terms, when it's called an income tax, it means you are taxed on the income, not your revenue. So, for example, as a business, you could make 1 million dirhams a year, but that's not your income. It's your revenue. It's the money that you receive, for example, from your various clients, and but it's not all your income, because then you need to offset all your expenses from all the revenue. And the income is basically when you take all your sort of revenue and offset your expenses from it. It's whatever that margin is. That's your income, just at a very high level. So it's not like just because you're a business and you make 1 million dirhams, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I have to pay 9% on all of my 1 million dirhams. Not at all. But that also means that you need, all businesses who have not been doing this yet will have to have significant changes to their bookkeeping practices and their kind of accounting and internal practices, where they will really have to be very vigilant in terms of keeping track of all of their expenses to allow them to ultimately offset all the revenue from expenses from the revenue, to make sure that they have a very clearly documentable and substantiated income base. Yeah. So that's definitely going to lead to some significant changes in businesses' way of operating.
That's an interesting point to highlight, actually. There's also some tax relief for small businesses under the new law, Ludmila.
Yes. So there's a specific, and by the way, the corporate tax law that we talked about is this law 47 2022. That's the main law. But then this main law will, just if you want to visualize it, is going to be like a spider web of regulations that will comprise ultimately the UAE corporate tax legal framework or platform. So it's this main law, this is substantive law, but as part of the substantive law, there's different regulations, circulars, amendments, clarifications, guidelines, decrees, and so on and so forth that will be sort of issued as part of this main substantive law. Yeah. So those regulations and those guidelines and those amendments and clarifications, some of them have already been issued, and there will be many more that are we already know are in discussion or in draft form. And so ultimately, we don't look at this as just this law number 47 because it's just the beginning. It's just going to create sort of the skeleton, if you will, and then all the meat on the bone it will be sort of an ongoing process as more regulations will come forward. And so this small business relief is an example of that. So of one of these regulations, and that was it was issued by virtue of a ministerial decision number 73 of 2023, just this year, and it's called the Small Business Corporate Tax Relief. That was, is based on this ministerial decision that is an add-on to the corporate tax law. And as per this Small Business Corporate Tax Relief, certain businesses, sort of small businesses or taxable persons whose income is below 3 million dirhams, so for each reportable period, are not to be subject to 9% corporate tax. So they are subject to basically 0%. So if you are a business whose income is 3 million dirhams, That's basically what you will only be paying. You'll be paying 0%, but anything above it, then you'll be subject to 9%. However, you do need to apply for this small business relief. So you have to be sort of a qualifying either free zone person, so a member of some sort of multinational enterprise groups. And there are some exemptions as well. So certain kind of companies, bigger companies, that, for example, that if you have like what's called the multinational enterprise groups, if you're a subset of that, one of these groups, you cannot benefit from small business relief because you're actually part of a much larger group. So there are a few exemptions there as well. But in order to benefit from this tax relief, businesses have to apply. And they have to apply during the applicable period. So it's not, in other words, it's not by default. Just because you're making less than you're within the 3 million threshold of income threshold does not mean that you automatically don't have to pay tax or you're 0%, zero rated. No, you have to specifically apply for that small tax relief, and in order to basically benefit. And as long as if your income starts going above the 3 million, then obviously you need to start paying the 9%. So that's basically the small business relief plan.
Finally, I just wanted to ask you about obligations. I mean, corporate tax in the UAE is, as of today, part of the country's legislative framework. So what do we need to know to understand that framework? What's important to point out?
Right. So there's a few big guidelines. One is that there is several thresholds in terms of being subject to the corporate tax law. Right. So one is that it applies to all businesses. Yep. And in whatever form, natural or legal, if there's a legal form and natural, as an example I drew before. So let's say my business, I have a license to practice law. So that I am a legal entity, I'm legal business. You, for example, if you're a freelancer, let's say a web designer, or a songwriter, you're a freelancer, you don't have a legal sort of a license for your free license. You may or may not. But if you don't have, that does not exclude you from this law. You're still in business, you're freelancing business, so you call it a natural person. Or, for example, let's say you own multiple properties and they in your own name, but you manage them as a business, right? That's an example of you being a natural person, but you're still subject, but you have a business. So you're subject to this law. So that's number one. So number two is that it includes all basically businesses and natural persons, the applicable natural persons or taxable persons in the UAE, which specifically means free zones. So all companies in free zone are subject to this law, irrespective of the nature of your business or your income or your threshold. So, and I'm talking about being subject to the law, right? So you're all subject to all the free zones, all the small little free zone companies in Ajman and Fujairah and Ras Al Khaimah, Al Kuwait, wherever they may be, they are also subject to this law. Just because they're free zones does not make them not. There was quite a bit of speculation, and there's a lot of sort of debate on whether free zones will actually fall under this law. And the answer is that they will. There are a few exceptions, and caveats, but as a general rule, I'm saying so they are all subject to the law. Now, what does it mean for all these taxable persons, which include legal and natural persons, but they'll call as a general term taxable persons. That's how the law refers to the likes of you and me. Right. So all these taxable persons have to register with FTA. Okay. So you could be a free zone business in Al Kuwait that's basically really just have had your little company for purposes of having a visa, for example, for yourself and your family. Or you could be, you could own small little sort of consultancy, a web design company, and you make, 100,000 dirhams a year. And so in a free zone, doesn't matter. As long as you are a business or a taxable person, you are required to register with FTA. Okay, yeah. But the registration, as we mentioned earlier, depends on when your fiscal year starts. If June is mid-year or in June, then you have to start registering now, except there are certain businesses that are not able to register yet, but for all others, we'll have to register as of January 2024. So all these businesses are subject to the law. As part of being subject to the law, they have to register with FTA, and more importantly, they all have to submit tax returns every year at the end of whatever 6 months after the end of the year. So that's important. Now that applies to the same small little mom and pop, like let's say free zone licenses or consultancies that are just exist there for purely for visa purposes, for example. And there's many like that. So they will all have to register with FTA, and they will all have to submit tax returns at the end of the year. However, in terms of the paying of the tax itself, it only applies to those businesses who are or taxable persons who actually have an income over the threshold,
yes,
i.e. over 375,000 dirhams, except obviously the small businesses that apply for the small business relief, that are within the threshold of 3 million dirhams. So only those will have to pay the 9%. So in other words, just because you're in a free zone and let's say you have a freelance license, and you may make 100 or 50,000 dirhams a year, or make nothing at all from that particular business, you still have to register with FTA, and you still have to submit your tax return. You just don't have to pay any tax.
And you need a tax registration number from the Federal Tax Authority, the FTA you mentioned.
Correct, yes. And that will be part of when you register, you will need to have that sort of the tax registration. Now, there's a few other, again, decrees and circulars and ministerial decisions and such that are coming, but one of the other ones is that we're talking about the audited financials. So the audited financials, there have been some recent clarifications that not all companies, not all businesses, not all taxable persons will have to provide and keep audited financials. And audited financials means when you have audited accountants, professional accountants that every year actually audit your books and sign off officially.
Yes.
So they're saying only businesses that are making more than 50 million dirhams a year will be required to actually have audited accounts and then others just have to have their own kind of bookkeeping and their own accounts, but they're not required to have an auditor audit their accounts.
To sign them off.
So this is a very, very recent clarification that was just issued recently, and that's just an example of how the law continues to evolve, and more of these clarifications and nuances are being hashed out as we go through the process. But in general, this is it. This is our reality now, as of certainly as of January 1 of 2024. All taxable persons, all businesses will have to be registered, and will have to start keeping their books with that in mind, because at the end of 2024, kind of by mid 2025, they will have to start actually paying the tax to the authorities. This is our new reality. So it's interesting because it will change the business dynamic in the UAE tremendously, but at the end of the day, obviously the authorities and the government views it as a positive and perhaps logical evolution in its development as a country and as a business hub. So this is the beginning of, I'm sure, many more podcasts that you and I will have to do on this topic. We are all learning this as we go through the process. This is all literally hot off the press. And today is the first day, and this is why we're doing it today, just to commemorate the June 1st of 2023 as the first day where businesses can now actually, in the UAE, those with a fiscal year starting as of June, are now officially subject to the UAE Corporate Tax Law. So congratulations to those businesses.
There's going to be a lot more to talk about on this topic, that's for sure. That's another edition of Lawgical. As Ludmila said, UAE Corporate Tax Law, and we're recording this on June the 1st, 2023, the first kind of D-Day, or it's T-Day, I'm not sure quite how we should term it. There you go.
T-Day it is.
Yeah. As ever, thank you for watching, listening, or both if you've done both. And thanks to our legal expert, managing partner here at Yamalova and Plethka, Ludmila Yamalova. Thanks for your expertise.
And thank you, Tim, always for your very engaging and capable discussion.
You can find us at LYLAW on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. You can find all the podcasts at lylawyers.com or on your favourite podcast platform. If you'd like your legal question answered in an episode of Lawgical or to talk to a qualified UAE experienced legal professional, just click on the contact button at lylawyers.com.